In a life that looked flawless, the truth was waiting to be exposed. She trusted him with everything, her heart, her future, her dreams. But while she was building a life full of hope, he was hiding secrets that could destroy it all. One moment, one discovery, and everything comes crashing down. The love she believed in turns into betrayal. The future she imagined disappears. But this is not where her story ends. Because in the middle of the chaos, she finds her strength. And what was meant to break her becomes the fire that makes her rise. Stronger, fearless, and impossible to defeat. The lesson? Sometimes the truth is painful, but it's also the key to your freedom. Trust your instincts, know your worth, and never be afraid to walk away from what no longer serves you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel. Your support is the biggest motivation for us to keep creating more meaningful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
He gripped her wrist in front of Chicago's architectural elite, dragged her across the polished concrete floor of a lobby that cost more than a dozen suburban homes, and shoved her so hard her hips struck the base of a steel girder. She tasted blood. His mother stood just behind him, a cruel smirk on her face. His mistress laughed a sharp, dismissive sound and strode away, her stilettos echoing like gunshots, and not one of the 300 people in that room lifted a finger to help her. She lay there on the cold ground, dizzy with shock, while her husband, the man who was supposed to protect her and their unborn child, loomed over her and spat the words he'd been wanting to say for years. "You are an anchor holding me down. You are nothing. You came from a dead-end town, and you will leave with nothing." But just then something small and silver detached from her dress. It was a locket, not a pendant. It skittered across the floor and came to a stop by the expensive loafers of the city's most reclusive architect. The old man bent down, picked it up, and his hands began to tremble because that locket held a secret, a design that was about to shatter the world her husband had built, the one his mother celebrated, and the one his mistress was banking on the woman he had just thrown to the floor of the $1.5 billion Sterling Tower. Was the woman whose family name was on the building. She had always been the heir, and she had forgotten it herself. This story is a reminder of a truth we often lose sight of. Your value is not defined by how others treat you when they think you are powerless. It is revealed by who you are when no one is paying attention, and sometimes the person who seems the most fragile is the one who holds all the cards. If this story made you feel that spark of justice, if it gave you goosebumps, hit that subscribe button this instant and activate notifications, because you will not want to miss what happens next. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done if you were Ava. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their worth is non-negotiable. And if you are still with me, thank you. You are why we tell these stories. The security footage was brutally clear. A pregnant woman in a simple blue dress stumbling back across an atrium floor. A man's arm still outstretched from the push 300 guests in black tie attire, frozen like figures in a grim diorama, and then that sickening, wet thud of a body hitting polished concrete with unforgiving force. Ava Sterling hit the floor of the building that bore her name, and a sharp agony shot through her hip, so intense her vision swam with black spots. Blood bloomed on her lower lip, a shocking crimson against her pale skin, and for a long beat, the only noise in that massive space was the ragged sound of her own breathing. Her silver locket, the one her grandfather had designed for her when she was just 10 years old, snapped from its chain and spun across the floor. It glittered under the track lighting before settling near a pair of handmade leather shoes. Nobody made a move to help her. 300 of Chicago's most celebrated designers and developers watched a pregnant woman curl up in pain, and not a single one offered a hand, because in a room like this, status was the only language spoken, and as far as they were all concerned, Ava had none. Her husband Marcus stood over her chest, heaving his handsome features contorted into a mask of pure contempt. His mother Eleanor stood beside him, holding her wineglass like she was making a toast, and Chloe Vance, the woman who was a senior partner at Marcus's firm and his secret lover clicked her heels as she turned her back, laughing softly. But what none of them noticed was the old man, the legendary Alistair Sterling, kneeling down to retrieve that locket. None of them saw his fingers shake as he recognized the unique clasp he had designed himself, and none of them heard him whisper into his security detail's earpiece with a voice cracking with emotion, "Get my legal team to the atrium. Now she is here." 72 hours before everything shattered, Ava had been a different woman, not transformed, just faded. She was a person who had been slowly and deliberately dimmed over the course of 6 years until she could no longer remember the sound of her own voice when it wasn't apologizing. She woke at 5:30 on a Wednesday morning in a cramped apartment she barely recognized, in a bed where the other side was cold. Because her husband had once again not come home, the sheets were smooth and undisturbed. She had given up on being surprised. Surprise implied that you expected something better, and Ava had learned to stop expecting anything from Marcus Thorne years ago. She made coffee anyway. 2 mugs, one with oat milk for her, one with 2 sugars. For him, she baked 2 croissants from scratch, placing them on 2 separate plates. One plate would remain untouched, just like it did every morning, and she would later wrap the pastry and give it to a homeless man on her way to work, a small act that eased the familiar sting of being forgotten. The apartment was tiny but immaculate. Ava kept it that way because Eleanor Marcus's mother had a habit of making surprise visits, running a gloved finger over bookshelves, searching for dust as if she were a drill sergeant. The decor was sparse, bought from thrift stores, except for one framed photo. It showed a younger Ava and her grandfather, a kind-faced man with laugh lines, standing proudly in front of a half-finished architectural model, their smiles so genuine they seemed to warm the room. Ava traced the frame as she passed, a ritual she'd adopted after her grandfather cut off contact with her 5 years ago when she chose Marcus over him. He was gone from her life now, taking his warmth and his secrets with him. She took the train to the bakery because her car, with over 190,000 miles on it, was in the shop. The check engine light had been a permanent fixture for a year, a constant glowing reminder of the repairs she couldn't afford because Marcus had used her savings 6 months prior for what he called a career investment, and she knew better than to ask when she'd see it again. At the Flour Mill Bakery, Ava was someone else entirely. She was the lead pastry chef, the quiet genius behind creations that had people lining up around the block here. She wasn't Marcus's disappointing wife. She was a creator, an artist. The children who came in called her the cake lady and drew pictures of her that she taped up by the ovens. Their parents trusted her with their most important celebrations, and she handled that trust with a reverence that came from a deep well of kindness inside her that Marcus had never managed to drain. Her boss, Mr. Chen, pulled her aside that morning, a rare smile on his face. News that made her feel a flutter of hope for the first time in months. "Ava, I've secured the funding for the second location. I want you to be a full partner. You've earned it. Your designs, your recipes, they are the heart of this place." Ava felt the sting of happy tears, the kind she hadn't shed in years. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. That means the world to me." She moved through her morning shift on that little cloud of validation, and during her break, she sat in the back room scrolling through her phone. No texts from Marcus, no missed calls, just her own reflection in the dark screen. A woman with tired eyes and a beauty that was easy to miss against the worn collar of her chef's coat. Her best friend Maya burst in holding 2 steaming bowls of ramen and an expression that said a lecture was coming. "Don't tell me you're sitting here staring at a blank screen waiting for Prince Not So Charming to remember you exist." Maya set the bowls down with a clatter. "Because my therapist gave me a great line last week and I'm about to use it on you, Maya. I'm okay. You are not okay. You are drinking lukewarm coffee for lunch because your husband took your baby fund for career investments, and I'm making air quotes so hard my fingers are cramping. Let me tell you something when a man shows you he's a user. Believe him the first time you keep waiting for the thoughtful husband update when the man never even downloaded the beta version. Ava actually laughed a rusty sound from deep in her chest. She'd forgotten what it felt like Maya had that talent. She was a flash of lightning to Ava's quiet drizzle, a fiercely loyal friend who wrapped hard truths in jokes to make them easier to swallow. Maya slid a ramen bowl toward her eat and listen. What's the definition of a bad investment? Pouring everything you have into something that gives you zero return. You've been warming that man's side of the bed for 6 years, hoping he'll suddenly show up with an apology and a spine. He is my husband. Maya, a husband who misses your birthday, a husband who drains your bank account, a husband whose mother treats you like gum on her shoe. Maya leaned in her voice, softening. You are carrying his child. You deserve a partner, Ava, not a project. You know that, don't you? Ava's hand went to the locket at her throat, a nervous habit. I know, she whispered, but knowing and leaving feel like two different worlds. Maya watched her for a moment, her eyes full of concern, and then she said the words that would echo in Ava's mind later when the floor fell out from under her life. There's a difference between being patient and being a volunteer victim, honey, and I'm getting worried you've forgotten which is which. Ava went home that Wednesday night to find 3 people at her small kitchen table, Marcus, his mother Eleanor, and Chloe Vance. They were huddled over a set of architectural drawings, eating takeout from the expensive Thai place Ava loved and could no longer afford. Amelia felt like Isabel had a way of occupying a room, her ambition so sharp and polished it felt like a physical presence. She wore her success like a bespoke suit, and her laughter was a calibrated sound designed for boardrooms. Marcus introduced her as his star venture capitalist, the mind behind his latest funding round, but the way her eyes swept over the penthouse, lingering on a detail Eliza had spent weeks perfecting, told a different story. It was a look of assessment, of cold appraisal, as if she were already measuring the space for her own furniture. Oh, so this is where you live, Isabel said, her voice smooth as silk. The view is spectacular. The acoustics, however, are a challenge. I was just telling Marcus on the way over, our new project needs a space that feels monumental, even when you're not building it. It's about creating a legacy, you know? Eliza placed a hand on her swollen belly, a quiet, protective gesture. She'd learned to move through her own home with a sense of quiet apology, as if her very presence, her pregnancy, was an inconvenience to Marcus's grand ambitions. She offered a quiet hello that was lost in the air and went to the kitchen for water. And then she saw it, propped casually on Isabel's sleek tablet, visible with every tap of her manicured fingers, was an architectural rendering. Not just any rendering, the rendering. The one for the cliffside home Eliza had been designing for them. For their future, for their family. A private, deeply personal project filled with secret alcoves and window seats she'd imagined reading to their child in. A design she'd poured her soul into for months, every line a whispered promise from Marcus that this was their forever plan. The file name was gone, replaced with a project code name, the Elysian Heights, but the design was hers. Every curve, every beam. It was the heart of her work, stolen from her personal server. And Marcus had told her just last week he thought she was getting distracted, that she should focus more on the baby and less on her little hobbies. And now it was on another woman's tablet, in her living room, in her home. That's my design. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence it sounded like a scream. Isabel looked up, her expression one of mild, curated surprise, like an actress waiting for her cue. I'm sorry. On your screen. That house. I designed that. For us. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. Marcus's smile, which had been fixed in place, tightened at the edges. Isabel, to her credit, didn't flinch. She simply tilted the tablet. Marcus spoke first, his tone the one Eliza recognized as the calm before the hurricane. Eliza, don't be dramatic. Inspiration is everywhere. Isabel and I have been developing this concept for months. You think because you sketched something similar, it belongs to you? That's your problem, Eliza. You're possessive. You attach sentiment to things that are meant to be assets. Isabel finally set her tablet down, leaning back with the serene confidence of a player who has already won the game. She clings to ideas, Marcus, like a child with a drawing. It's sweet, but it's not business. Isabel then smiled, a slow, predatory smile aimed directly at Eliza. I think what Marcus is trying to say is that a truly great idea will always find its way to the people who can actually execute it. She picked up her wine glass, her movements fluid and deliberate. It's a stunning concept. Marcus has wonderful taste and vision, at least. The laughter that followed was the sound of two people confirming that Eliza and her contribution were irrelevant, and the most painful part was a small, terrified voice inside Eliza's head that whispered they might be right. She excused herself to the bedroom, closing the door softly because even her heartbreak wasn't allowed to be loud in this house. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, and called her brother, Liam. She was presenting my work, Liam, in my house, on her tablet, and he just stood there and told me I was being dramatic. Liam was silent for exactly 3 seconds, which for him was an eternity. Then he said, Eli, the sheer nerve of these people could launch a rocket. You know what this is, right? This isn't just him being a jerk. This is theft. I just have to get through this, Liam. That's all I can think about right now. No, Eliza. Liam's voice became sharp, serious. There's a world of difference between getting through it and fighting back. Getting through it means you're treading water while they sail away on your ship. Fighting back means you start building your own battleship, and I need you to start building. Eliza hung up, sitting in the dark, listening to the faint murmur of their voices from the living room. She touched the small, simple ring her grandmother had left her and wondered if she had the strength to walk out the door and burn the whole thing down. She didn't know it yet, but the match was already in her hand. The next day, Wednesday, arrived with a silence that felt heavy and sharp, the kind of stillness that hangs in the air right before an earthquake. Eliza woke up exhausted, made breakfast for one, and drove her car to the downtown office of her architectural firm, holding on to the one piece of her life that was still hers. Maybe today would be different. Maybe she could lose herself in her work. Maybe she could talk to her boss, her mentor, and figure out a plan. Maybe she could remember what it felt like to be respected. Instead, today was the day the ground fell away completely. Her keycard didn't work at the main entrance. She swiped it 3 times. A red light blinked with a flat, final sound that echoed the closing of a door. A junior associate she barely knew came down and told her that Mr. Sterling, her boss, wanted to see her in his office. Immediately. Sterling was a good man with a weary face that now looked profoundly uncomfortable. He avoided her eyes, shuffling a stack of papers. Eliza, he started, we've received a formal notice from Marcus Vance's legal team. They're alleging a severe conflict of interest regarding a project you've been developing. They claim you've been using company resources to work on a private design, and now that his firm is launching a similar venture, it puts us in a legally indefensible position. We take these claims extremely seriously. Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. That's a lie. He knows it's a lie. I've been working here for 7 years. Ask anyone on the team. They know my work ethic. Sterling finally looked at her, his eyes full of something that looked like pity. Marcus's company is our biggest client, Eliza. They've made it clear they will pull the entire account if we don't address this. I'm so sorry, but we have to place you on immediate, indefinite leave pending the results of this investigation. Effective immediately. Who is their lawyer? Eliza's voice was hollow. I have a right to know who's making these accusations. The notice was filed by Isabelle Laurent on behalf of their new joint venture. I'm sorry, our hands are tied. Eliza walked out of the firm in a trance, clutching her purse. She didn't even have a box of things to carry. Her life's work was all digital, all stored on a server she could no longer access. 7 years of her career erased with a single email, small enough to be dismissed with one lie. In the lobby, still trying to breathe, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A courier was delivering a set of large, formal presentation boards to the front desk. They were addressed to Sterling. They were for the Legion Heights project, and Isabelle Laurent's name was printed in sharp, elegant letters at the bottom. She wasn't just stealing the design. She was replacing Eliza, pitching it to her boss, colonizing her professional life. Isabelle walked past Eliza on her way to the elevator and into the firm that had just suspended her without so much as a glance, and Eliza finally understood. The legal notice was detailed and specific because it had been drafted by someone who knew exactly how to weaponize the law. This wasn't just Marcus's passive cruelty. This was a strategic demolition of her career, engineered by a woman who wanted Eliza to have absolutely nothing. No job, no reputation, no path forward. Eliza drove home in a fog, her mind a maelstrom of shock and betrayal. When she walked through the door of the penthouse, Marcus was on the phone, pacing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He saw her, and his face was a mask of calculated concern. "You're home early," he said into the phone. "Yeah, she just got the news. She's pretty upset." "I think it's for the best, though. The stress isn't good for her right now." It was a perfect performance of the worried husband. "I wasn't suspended because of stress, I was—" But her voice trailed off. He held up a hand, silencing her. His mother's name was on the caller ID, and he kept it on speaker, either because he didn't care or because he wanted her to hear. His mother's sharp voice filled the silent apartment. "I told you, Marcus. She's a liability. She's too fragile for this world you're building. Did Isabel's lawyer say this would be enough? We need to establish a pattern of instability. It will make things so much cleaner when you file for sole custody." Marcus's eyes met Eliza's, and for a fraction of a second, she saw a flicker of something. Shame, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "We'll talk later, Mom," he said, and hung up. Eliza stood in her own living room, a living room she'd designed, and realized with sickening clarity that her husband, his mother, and his mistress weren't just betraying her. They were plotting against her. This was a war, and she hadn't even known it had been declared. That night, after Marcus left for a business dinner, Eliza sat down at her kitchen island with her personal laptop. She needed to find an attorney, needed to find a job, needed to find a way to breathe. But when she opened the laptop, she didn't go to a job site. Ethan's cloud drive was still synced to the tablet, a rookie mistake he'd never normally make. Chloe should have ignored it. She knew a stronger woman, or at least one less exhausted by the third trimester, might have respected the digital privacy of a man who so clearly respected nothing about her. But a folder name snagged her attention and held it tight. Project Nightingale. Nightingale was her mother's maiden name. The Nightingale Collection was her grandfather's library in Beacon Hill, the little brownstone where Arthur and Eleanor had raised her, surrounded by more love than most museums have ever held. She clicked into the folder. The chain of documents was a roadmap of betrayal, spanning 3 months between Ethan and Isabella. The language was cold and financial, Isabella's influence obvious. They had been systematically cataloging her grandfather's rare book collection, 47 first editions in a historic Boston neighborhood. Their appraisal valued it between $400,000 and $500,000. Not a king's ransom, but certainly enough to seed the next chapter of their lives. The memos laid out the entire scheme. Ethan would file for separation, with Isabella acting as his counsel. They'd argue Chloe was emotionally volatile due to the pregnancy, using her recent doctor-ordered bed rest as proof. With Chloe painted as unstable and dependent, Isabella would negotiate a settlement where the book collection would be liquidated to cover shared debts. They would pocket the profit, and Chloe would be left with a newborn and an empty nursery. The final document in the folder was a memo from Isabella to Ethan, time-stamped that very afternoon. Phase 1 complete. She's officially on medical leave. Phase 2 launches after your promotion Friday. Be prepared. Chloe stared at the screen, her hands trembling so violently the words blurred. Her first impulse was to shatter the tablet, to call Ethan and unleash a storm of fury. But then she remembered her grandfather's voice, calm and steady across the years, the way Arthur used to sound when he was teaching her about history. When your enemies are busy digging their own graves, little bird, the last thing you do is take away their shovels. Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath. She downloaded every file onto a hidden thumb drive, logged out of the cloud account, cleared the tablet's cache, and for the first time in years, instead of succumbing to tears, she started to scheme. Thursday dawned gray and misty, the Boston rain tapping on the window panes like a nervous visitor. 24 hours until the awards dinner, and Chloe hadn't slept a wink. She had spent the night in the wingback chair, turning strategies over in her mind, feeling for the first time in years like a person who could shape her own destiny instead of just enduring it. Ethan had stumbled in around 2 a.m, smelling of gin and a perfume that wasn't hers. He hadn't even glanced at the dark shape in the chair. He never saw her unless she was an obstacle in his path. Sophie arrived at 10 a.m. with a bottle of champagne, a bag of gourmet donuts, and the barely contained rage of a best friend who had been biting her tongue for 5 years. "Okay," Chloe said, opening the door. "I need your help, but before that, you have to listen without saying a single word, and I know that's like asking you not to breathe, so I got us donuts." Sophie's jaw dropped. Did you just make a joke? An actual sarcastic joke? Oh my God, who is this woman and what have you done with Chloe? For the first time that week, Chloe managed a real smile. I found their playbook, Soph, Ethan, and Isabella. They're planning to leave me, take my grandfather's entire library, and use the baby to prove I'm unstable. Isabella is the one who suggested I take stress leave from the university. Sophie placed the champagne on the counter with the delicate precision of a bomb technician, which is how Chloe knew she was furious. I'm going to need you to tell me everything. And then I'm going to need to know what kind of car Isabella drives. No violence, Sophie. Fine. A strongly worded, glitter-bombed letter then. Now, tell me everything. Chloe recounted the whole story, the hidden folder, the financial plans, the affair, the years of subtle manipulation that she now saw not as random acts of cruelty, but as a calculated campaign designed to erode her confidence and leave her with nothing. When she finished, Sophie was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "We need to get your grandfather's archives, all of them. If they're making a play for the collection, we need to see exactly what Arthur and Eleanor left you, and we need to see it before they do." They spent the day unpacking boxes Chloe had kept sealed in her small study since Arthur's passing 2 years ago. 2 years of raw grief had made them impossible to touch, the weight of her loss turning every old photograph into a fresh wound. Sophie, a rare book archivist by trade, handled the documents with an expert's gentle touch, creating organized piles on the floor while Chloe sat beside her, running her fingers over each item as if it were a holy relic. Thank you notes, lecture drafts in Arthur's academic scrawl, a pressed rose tucked inside a copy of The Great Gatsby. And then Sophie gasped. Chloe! Her voice was different, hushed with a kind of shock Chloe had never heard from her before. It was a mix of awe and fear. "Who is William Davenport?" Chloe looked over. "I have no idea. Why? because according to these original stock certificates, he was your great-grandfather. The room seemed to tilt. Chloe crawled across the floor and took the crisp documents from Sophie's hands. They were bearer bonds from a company called Davenport Maritime Trust, and the names were printed in elegant old-world script. Owner, William Davenport. Beneficiary, Arthur Nightingale. Heir apparent, Chloe Nightingale. Nightingale, the name her grandfather had always told her was her only legacy. "There's more," Sophie said, her hands moving faster through the box. "There's a key to a safe deposit box at a private bank downtown. And Chloe, there's a letter. It's sealed. Your grandfather's handwriting. On the front it says, 'For when the story needs its real beginning.'" The sealed envelope from Arthur, the one she'd forgotten, tucked away at the bottom of a box with all her sadness. She'd left it unopened for 2 years, respecting her grandfather's cryptic words even when they made no sense. Chloe held the heavy paper in her hands. Her name was written across it in Arthur's distinctive slanted script. Just seeing that familiar handwriting made her eyes well up. "Read it," Sophie whispered. Chloe broke the wax seal with a trembling thumb and unfolded the letter, written on thick, cream-colored stationery that still smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco, the scent of her grandfather's study. "My dearest Chloe," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I am gone, and the time has come for you to know the whole truth. We wanted to tell you so many times, but we were afraid of what the knowledge might do, the weight it would place upon you. Your true family, the Davenports, they weren't just academics, my dear. They built an empire from the sea, a dynasty worth more than you can possibly fathom. But great wealth attracts great predators, people who would have hurt you to get to it. So your parents made a terrible choice. They asked me, their most trusted friend, to raise you under my name, to give you a life of the mind, not of money. We wanted you to grow up knowing your value was in your heart and intellect. But now you must know who you are. You are the sole surviving heir to the Davenport fortune. Everything, the shipping lines, the real estate, the trust, it all belongs to you. It has been managed by a man named Alistair Finch, waiting for your 30th birthday. On that day, you must present this key and claim your birthright. He will be expecting you. We love you more than all the words in all the books. Your grandfather, Arthur." The silence in the room was deafening. Sophie spoke first, her voice a ghost of a sound. "Chloe, Davenport Maritime, the Davenport Trust. That awards dinner tomorrow night. It's a charity gala sponsored by the Davenport Trust at the Davenport Building." Chloe looked at her friend, her mind struggling to connect the dots of a new universe. "I know, it's a $200 billion trust, and I think I own it." Chloe looked down at the old skeleton key in her palm. Amelia traced the curve of her stomach, a perfect roundness beneath the thin fabric of her maternity dress. At 7 months pregnant, a strange and quiet loneliness had become her constant companion in their sleek Chicago apartment. Liam, her husband and a star architect, was working late again, but recently, late nights felt different. More like hollow spaces filled with overly smooth excuses and apologies that came a little too quickly. A tiny nagging voice she'd tried so hard to ignore kept whispering that something was deeply wrong. He came home from a 3-day business trip to Boston smelling of a perfume she didn't wear, something sharp and floral, like gardenias and ambition. While she unpacked his suitcase, her fingers brushed against a stiff, folded paper in a side pocket. It was a receipt from an exclusive artisan jeweler for a custom-made platinum bracelet, engraved with the words, "To a better view, see." A cold dread washed over her. He had never bought her anything like it. "That's tomorrow," Chloe whispered, pressing the phone to her ear, trying to make the impossible feel real. "Can you tell me what the trust involves?" "Miss Nightingale, I believe that is a conversation best had face to face. But I can tell you this. You are the sole heir to the Davenport Dynasty. the maritime company, the international real estate holdings, the charitable foundation, and the controlling interest in a dozen other ventures. Everything your great-grandfather built, it is now yours. Sophie, who had her ear pressed to the back of the phone, made a small squeaking sound, like a mouse that had just been handed the keys to a cheese factory. "There is a gala tomorrow evening at your penthouse," Mr. Vance continued over the phone. "It is the pre-IPO launch for Aura, the company your seed money funded 5 years ago, Miss Sterling. It would be appropriate for you to be there. It is your stage." "My stage," Amelia repeated, the words feeling foreign. "And there is something else. The documents you sent me confirm your husband's plan. He suspected you might fight back if you ever found out. That is why he has been slowly isolating you. He sacrificed your career to build his own." Amelia closed her eyes. All those years, all the subtle comments from Julian about her stepping back from architecture, the gentle suggestions that his work was more important, they were not concerns. They were tactics, a form of love that was purely self-serving. "Mr. Vance, there's something you should know too," Amelia said, her voice steady. "My husband doesn't know that I know. Nobody in my life knows except for the woman who coached me through this call." Julian Vance was silent for a moment. Then he said precisely, "Then tomorrow night will be a significant event. I will have personnel on standby." After ending the call, Amelia and Chloe sat on the floor of Chloe's apartment, surrounded by printed emails and legal strategies. Chloe said what they were both thinking. "So, your husband, who for 2 years has made you feel like a liability while you're carrying his child, plans to take the company you funded public for $1 billion while you actually own 40% of the equity. And tomorrow, you are both going to be in the penthouse you paid for, and he has no idea." Amelia nodded. "Girl," Chloe said slowly, "the nerve of that man could power the entire financial district. But yours could light up the entire Midwest." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Amelia felt a spark. Not hope, but something colder, something sharp. The feeling lasted for exactly 4 hours. At 3 in the afternoon, Amelia went online to her personal bank account. She needed capital. Whatever happened tomorrow, she needed resources today. A retainer for Mr. Vance, a new phone Julian could not access, money to survive on while the assets were frozen. She logged in. Her balance, checking account, $0.00. Savings account, $0.00. Amelia stared at the screen. She refreshed the page. The same result. Every dollar she had, the money from her last architectural project, the emergency fund she had meticulously built, it was all gone. She called the bank. A polite representative confirmed the funds had been moved that morning into a new corporate investment account. The transfer was authorized by Julian Sterling, the primary account holder. Amelia hung up and called Julian. He answered on the second ring, his voice hurried and annoyed. "Oh, that," he said. "I consolidated our liquid assets for a pre-IPO investment. It is for our future. You should be happy." "I cannot access any of it, Julian. I have nothing." "Then I guess you had better be on your best behavior tomorrow night." He hung up. Amelia stood in her bedroom, holding a phone that felt like a cold stone. 24 hours ago, she had discovered she was a 40% owner of a billion-dollar company. 4 hours ago, she had felt powerful. And now, she could not afford a taxi. She called Chloe and told her what happened. Chloe's response was a string of furious, eloquent curses that ended with her saying, "You are staying with me tonight. Do not even think about arguing. I have a very old bottle of scotch and a very fresh supply of outrage, and both are at your service." That night, in Chloe's starkly modern apartment, surrounded by legal books and the fierce loyalty of the only person who had ever seen her clearly, Amelia sat at the kitchen island and tried to find a way forward. "I have nothing, Chloe. No money, no job. He has probably already locked me out of the company's servers. I know I own the company on paper, but right now, in this reality, I am completely powerless. Chloe sat down across from her, taking both of Amelia's hands. Listen to me. You have something he has completely forgotten you possess. You have the truth, and tomorrow night you are going to walk into that party, and you are going to stand on your own stage, and you are going to let the truth do its work. What if it is not enough? Chloe squeezed her hands. It is always enough. It just does not always feel like it ahead of time. Friday evening, the Sterling penthouse glowed like a lantern against the Chicago skyline. Its windows cast golden rectangles of light onto the city below, a beacon for the fleet of black cars arriving at the tower's private entrance. Inside, the city's tech and finance elite mingled, their voices a low hum of ambition and champagne, confident in the shared belief that they were in the presence of greatness. Modern chandeliers hung over polished concrete floors that reflected the glittering guests like a dark lake. A DJ spun ambient electronic music from a discreet corner, and caterers moved through the crowd with architecturally arranged appetizers. 300 guests, the most powerful players in the city, old money and new tech, all performing their roles, unaware that the person who actually held the most power in the room was about to arrive in a dress he had told her was unflattering. Chloe had performed a miracle. She had found a simple navy blue maternity dress in the back of Amelia's closet, added a striking modern silver necklace from her own jewelry box, and suddenly it wasn't just a dress. It was a statement. It didn't scream wealth. It radiated a quiet, unshakable confidence that made Amelia's fierce intelligence the center of attention. But nobody in this room was looking for quiet intelligence. They were looking for the next big thing. "You look regal," Chloe said, adjusting the necklace. "Now remember the plan. Mr. Vance is meeting you by the East Terrace at 9:30. Until then, you are simply the supportive wife. Do not confront Julian. Do not even look at his mistress. Just observe." Amelia nodded, then hugged Chloe with a sudden, desperate strength. "If anything goes wrong," Amelia whispered, "you are the best partner I have ever had." "Nothing is going wrong," Chloe said firmly. "And when this is over, I want a full report on every micro-expression. Julian's mistress, when she finds out, I want to know if she gasps first or just freezes. I have money on freeze." Amelia entered the main room, her own living room, and it felt both intimately familiar and like a hostile foreign country. She saw Julian instantly. He was at the center of the largest and loudest group of people, holding a whiskey glass like it was an award. He was handsome, she had to give him that, with the kind of polished, easy charm that made people want to give him their money. His suit was impossibly sharp, probably paid for with her money, and his smile was broad and practiced and aimed at a journalist from a major tech publication. Simone stood beside him, draped in a crimson dress, her hand on his forearm, a gesture of casual ownership. She was beautiful and sleek, and she surveyed the room like a queen surveying her new kingdom. Julian's mother, Eleanor, hovered nearby, holding a glass of champagne and radiating smug satisfaction. Amelia stayed near the edges of the room. She moved with the quiet invisibility she had perfected over the past few years, making herself smaller to avoid taking up space. But tonight, that invisibility was a strategy. She watched. She listened. She learned the dynamics of the room, cataloging the faces of the board members Mr. Vance had pointed out to her. She was looking at a painting they had bought on their honeymoon when Julian found her. His voice was a venomous whisper in her ear, carefully shielded from the nearby guests who were laughing at one of his jokes. "What in God's name are you doing back here?" "What is going on, Amelia? You were supposed to stay in the bedroom." Amelia turned slowly. "This is a party in our home." His eyes scanned her simple dress with undisguised fury. And you show up looking like that in front of these people? Eleanor materialized at his elbow, her specialty. Oh dear, she is here. Julian, I thought we agreed. And then Simone, completing the trio, a champagne flute in her hand and amusement in her eyes. Let her stay, Julian. It is almost charmingly retro, like seeing a silent film at a modern cinema. Amelia felt the familiar clenching in her gut, the physiological response her body had learned after years of this subtle, corrosive abuse. But underneath it, something else was solidifying. A quiet resolve that had been forged in the discovery of a hidden computer file, tempered in a friend's apartment and armed by a lawyer who believed in her. She looked at Julian and said the 5 words she had come to say. I know about the contingency folder. I know about the scheme to liquidate my grandmother's estate. I know Chloe manufactured the ethics complaints at the university, and I know you emptied our joint investment portfolio this morning. The circle of Chicago's tech elite and art patrons around them fell silent, that specific hush that falls over a crowd smelling scandal. It wasn't shock, it was anticipation. The kind of silence that comes with hungry eyes and tilted cocktail glasses, an unspoken thrill that this drama would be the main story at tomorrow's power lunch. Liam's face cycled through 3 distinct expressions. First came pure, unguarded surprise, the look of a man caught cold and knowing it. Next was the flicker of calculation, his mind like a high-speed trader processing risk and reward. Finally, he landed on the one that had never failed him, righteous indignation. You're having another breakdown, he said, his voice loud enough to carry. She's been like this for weeks, paranoid, delusional. Chloe, ever the perfect partner, chimed in with the lines she had clearly rehearsed. It's why she lost her position at the library. We're all so worried. Someone should really get her some help. She was clearly spiraling, and Chloe, stepping into the role of the compassionate professional, delivered the final, sealing blow. As your friend and as an attorney, Alara, I have to advise you to stop. Making baseless accusations like these, it's textbook slander. Ilara felt the moment sharpen into perfect focus. This was it. The confrontation she'd been building toward. The instant where irrefutable fact would shatter their tower of lies. She had the documents. She had the proof. With a steady hand, she reached into her purse for her phone and opened the secure folder. The folder was empty. Every last file was gone. The scanned legal documents, the brokerage statements, the damning text messages between Liam and Chloe detailing their entire plot, all of it had vanished. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper just for her. Our shared cloud is a beautiful thing, isn't it? I watched you upload every file in real time, deleted it all from my laptop before we even got in the car, along with the money. He pulled back, a mask of concern sliding over his face for the benefit of their audience. My love, he said, his voice dripping with false empathy for the crowd, why don't we get you home? You're not yourself. The whispers started instantly. Poor thing, she looks so lost. I heard the university had to let her go. He is a saint for putting up with her. Chloe was already weaving the story to a group of investors, her lawyerly tone giving it the weight of authority. She's had a history of mental health challenges. It's truly heartbreaking. We've been trying to get her to accept help for months. Ilara stood frozen in the middle of the art gallery, surrounded by people who now saw her as unhinged. She was holding a useless phone, wearing a rented designer dress that now felt like a costume, and the walls of their trap had just snapped shut. Then Liam grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft skin above her elbow, his favorite spot, the one that bruised easily but was always hidden by a sleeve. I told you to drop it, he hissed, the charming facade gone now that he knew he had won. I'm so sorry, everyone, he announced, pulling her toward the grand exit. My wife is just Unwell. She's been struggling lately, and we're working on getting her the right care. Let go of me, Elara said, trying to twist out of his grip. Don't you touch me. You see? He turned to the crowd, his face a portrait of weary patience. This is what I live with, this aggression, this instability. I've tried everything. Chloe materialized beside them, her expression a perfect blend of pity and clinical assessment. She was a foster kid, you know. Never had a real family. It's sad, but it was only a matter of time before these issues surfaced. From across the room, but with perfect projection, Chloe added the final nail in the coffin. It's quite common in cases of early childhood trauma. Severe attachment disorders can manifest as persecutory delusions. I've read dozens of psychiatric studies on it. Elara scanned the room. 200 faces stared back, a sea of morbid curiosity, discomfort, and the smug pity reserved for watching someone else's public implosion. Not a single person looked like they believed her. She felt the tears then, not the quiet, controlled tears she was used to, but a raw, ugly sob that shook her shoulders and tore from her throat. Doesn't anyone see what he's doing? She choked out, her voice cracking. Can't any of you see the truth? Liam's performance vanished. What was left was raw, honest cruelty. You are nothing, he spat, his voice low and vicious. You came from nothing, and you'll go back to nothing. I'm done with you. And then he shoved her. Hard. His hands hit her shoulders, the force sending her stumbling backward. Her heel caught on the edge of a rug. Her arms flailed, finding nothing but air as the gallery lights spun above her, and the polished concrete floor rushed up to meet her. The impact sent a crack of pain through her hip. Her purse flew open, its contents scattering across the floor. A tube of lipstick, her keys, her phone, and an old leather-bound book of poetry she always carried, a gift from her grandmother. The small book slid across the slick floor, spinning under the gallery lights, before coming to a stop against a pair of handmade Italian leather shoes. 200 people watched. No one moved to help. Julian Croft had hosted the Sterling Foundation's annual benefit for 20 years. He had built the foundation from the ground up after his dearest friends, Edward and Catherine Sterling, died in a sailing accident decades ago. He had managed their vast fortune, honored their philanthropic wishes, and for the last 5 years, since the death of Catherine's most trusted friend, he had been engaged in a quiet, desperate search for their only child, a daughter hidden away as an infant to protect her from a rival family's threats. When the small, leather-bound book slid to a halt at his feet, he recognized it instantly. Not the title, but the bookbinder's mark on the spine, a tiny, embossed silver hawk, the private crest of the Sterling family bindery. Edward Sterling had explained it to him 30 years prior. Every book in our private library has this mark. If anything ever happens, this is how you'll find our daughter. Her guardian will keep one for her. It's the only key. Julia knelt beside the woman on the floor. Her face was streaked with tears, and a trickle of blood ran from her lip. But through the pain in her eyes, he saw it. He saw Catherine's jawline and Edward's piercing gaze. He picked up the book, his hand trembling slightly as he ran a thumb over the silver hawk. "Miss," he whispered, helping her sit up. "Are you all right?" She just nodded, too stunned to speak. He ignored the man who had shoved her. He ignored the 200 silent onlookers. He gave a quiet, sharp signal to his assistant. "My car! Service entrance! Now!" He did not cause a scene. He did not confront the liar. He knew the full weight of the Sterling legal team would be far more effective. He turned back to the woman and spoke with an authority that cut through the silence. "Come with me. You are safe now." He helped Elara to her feet with the care one would afford a priceless artifact and guided her through a private door, down a quiet hall lined with photos of the family she never knew she had. In a silent, wood-paneled office, he brought her a glass of water and a first aid kit. He sat across from her and laid the book on the desk between them. "My name is Julian Croft," he said, his voice gentle. "I was your parents' attorney, and I am the executor of their estate." "My parents?" Ilara stared at him, bewildered. The name on the Foundation's literature suddenly clicked. "Sterling. My grandmother," she began. "Your grandmother, Anne, was the bravest woman I have ever known," Julian said. His eyes filled with an old sadness. "She was your mother's closest friend. She gave up her entire life to keep you safe, to raise you in anonymity as her own. She lived a simple life so that you could one day have this one." 20 minutes later, after the shock had begun to recede, Julian opened his briefcase. He was the one who had been searching for her all along. "Anne's death triggered the final protocols of your parents' will. I have been looking for you ever since." He slid a thick document across the desk. "This is the Sterling Trust. Everything this foundation owns, the art in that gallery, the buildings that bear its name, the entire portfolio your husband tried to steal a piece of. It is all yours. It has always been waiting for you to come home." The sense of betrayal was so deep it felt like a physical ache. "Chloe," her friend Maya said, sitting beside her with a laptop glowing in the dim apartment, "I am so sorry. He didn't just have an affair. He designed her a palace." Maya tilted the screen, revealing architectural plans for a breathtaking Chicago penthouse. But scattered among the blueprints were candid photos of Chloe's husband Liam with another woman, Stella, laughing and embracing in the very spaces he had designed. The total amount he had funneled into their secret project was over $200,000. Chloe stared at the images, then at Maya, then at her own trembling hands. "He told me that project was just a concept," she whispered, her voice cracking. "All this time, it was for her." Maya pointed to a detail on the screen. "And he used his access to your joint savings to fund it. The question is, Chloe, what are you going to do?" The faint sound of city nightlife drifted up from the street, a world away from the silent devastation in the room. She had been raised by a mother who believed in scorched earth tactics, but Chloe said something that surprised Maya. "I don't want revenge. I want to dismantle them. There is a difference." Chloe's first call was to her estranged uncle, Marcus, a corporate lawyer known for his ruthlessness. The phone rang once before he answered, the clinking of ice in a glass audible in the background. "Kiddo, I'm in the middle of closing a merger. This better be urgent." "Marcus," Chloe said, her voice suddenly firm, "I need you to come to my apartment. Use the rear entrance and bring your laptop." Why do I get the feeling I'm about to become an accomplice to something spectacular? "Because you are," Chloe replied. "And Marcus, bring a bottle of your best scotch." While she waited, Chloe posed 3 questions to Maya, each one as precise and strategic as a brushstroke on a canvas. First, Stella's real estate firm is launching this penthouse tonight. She's going to try and paint me as unhinged. Can we stop her? Maya's expression turned grimly gleeful. "Are you kidding? With these photos, the proof he used his firm's resources, and the fraudulent bank transfers, we can get an emergency injunction to halt the entire launch party. Second, Liam drained our savings to pay for it all. The seed money came directly from my inheritance. Can we prove that?" Maya nodded. "The wire transfers are all time-stamped. He moved the money without your signature. That's not just a breach of trust, it's felony financial fraud. Third, the architectural firm where he works. If Stella promised him a partnership in exchange for his private services, is that actionable?" Maya almost smiled. "It's more than actionable. It's a massive conflict of interest that violates his professional code of conduct. It's grounds for having his license revoked." Chloe looked at her, her eyes clear and steady. "Then here's what we're going to do." She didn't send a single angry text. She didn't storm into his office. She didn't need him to witness her power to know that she held it. She had Marcus quietly reach out to 3 people who would be attending the launch party. The first was the senior partner of Liam's architectural firm, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, who was enjoying a pre-party cocktail at the bar. Marcus approached her discreetly and presented a tablet showing evidence that her star architect had committed fraud, embezzling marital assets and company resources for his lover. Eleanor's face went through several shades of fury before settling on an icy calm that promised retribution. The second was David Chen, the lead investor in Stella's penthouse project. Marcus informed him, again with quiet gravity, that the project's architect and developer were embroiled in a criminal fraud investigation that would freeze all assets tied to the launch. David's glass of whiskey paused halfway to his mouth, where it remained for nearly 15 seconds. The third was a celebrated architecture columnist, Julian Croft, known for his zero-tolerance policy on industry corruption. Marcus simply provided him with a secure link containing the photos, financial records, and proof of professional misconduct. While these quiet conversations were happening on the periphery of the party, Liam and Stella were celebrating in the center of the room. They had no idea that the world they had built was being systematically dismantled around them. They were too busy toasting themselves, basking in the glow of what they believed was their ultimate victory. Then the cracks began to show. David Chen approached Liam first, his expression looking as though someone had just told him his prize racehorse had broken a leg. "Liam," he said carefully, "I just had a most enlightening conversation. Tell me, when exactly were you planning to disclose that your personal life was a 9-figure liability?" Liam laughed. "My wife? She's nobody. She's an art curator from Boston." David looked at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Right, okay, I think I need some air." He walked away, leaving Liam with a confused frown. He shrugged and turned back to his conversation. Across the penthouse, Eleanor Vance cornered Stella, interrupting her mid-sentence. "Miss Moreno, are you aware that your partner's designs are now exhibits in a fraud investigation and that he may be facing disbarment?" Stella's champagne glass trembled in her hand, and in a quiet corner, Liam's phone rang. He answered it, and the color drained from his face as the managing partner from his own firm delivered a message that ended with the words, "Pack up your office tomorrow morning." The walls closed in on both of them at the same time, from different directions, for different reasons, and neither of them understood why. They looked at each other across the crowded room with expressions of dawning panic and confusion, like animals sensing a predator they could not see. Then the elevator doors opened and a man neither of them had expected walked in. Javier Rios was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, and he had the flat, calculating eyes of a person who viewed other people primarily as assets or obstacles. He was a titan of Chicago real estate, which was a polite way of saying he made his living taking things from people who couldn't protect them. He had been trying to force a hostile takeover of Stella's company for a year. He had informants at the party, of course. A man like Javier didn't go anywhere without intelligence. When his people informed him that Stella's flagship project was suddenly imploding, he moved with the speed and precision of a shark that had been waiting for this exact moment. He found Chloe in the quiet library downstairs, walked in without knocking, sat down without being invited, and delivered a threat that turned her careful plan to ashes. "Mrs. Miller," he said, with a smile that never reached his eyes, "the wronged woman. I've been waiting for this for years. Your husband's employment contract has a morality clause. If his personal conduct brings his firm into disrepute, all rights to his designs revert to the company." Chloe's face went pale, the professional misconduct complaint. Javier smiled wider. "Funny how these things work out. By morning, my lawyers will have an order placing all of Liam's project designs under my control. I'm acquiring his firm. And then I will finish this building and sell it for a fortune." He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. The room was silent. Chloe looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Maya. And for a terrible moment, the justice they had been building collapsed like a house of cards in a sudden wind. Then Chloe spoke, and her voice was calm. That morality clause, who has the authority to invoke it? The firm's senior partner, Marcus said, his eyes widening. Eleanor Vance. Is she still upstairs at the party? Maya's eyes lit up. Yes, she is. Then we need to talk to her, right now. Chloe walked toward the elevator, not through the service entrance this time, but toward the main penthouse doors. The same doors she was meant to enter as Liam's wife. But she was not just a wife anymore. She was not invisible. She was not apologizing for existing. She was Chloe Miller, and she was walking into a war. She walked directly to Eleanor Vance, who was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of water and the expression of a woman who had already made several difficult decisions that evening and was prepared to make more. Miss Vance, Chloe said, and her voice carried the steady clarity of someone who has finally stopped being afraid. My name is Chloe Miller. In approximately 10 minutes, a fraudulent claim on my husband's work, filed by Javier Rios, is going to be used to steal this entire project. Eleanor studied her over the rim of her glass. And why should I believe you? Because Maya here, who is a forensic analyst, can verify my husband's criminal activity. Because my uncle, Marcus Thorne, head of corporate litigation, can provide every document you need. And because if you look across this penthouse at the man who used our life savings to build a monument for his mistress, you will see the key to stopping Javier Rios from devouring your company. You will see him whispering with the woman who tried to ruin my career. The gallery owner glanced across the crowded floor. Julian was indeed smiling, though the expression looked cemented onto his face. Sasha, a notoriously sharp art critic, stood beside him, her gaze flicking towards the exits. Veronica, a wealthy patron, was on her third glass of Prosecco, her fingers trembling slightly. Show me everything Miss Sterling said. They moved into her private office. Arthur spread the files across the glass desk. Leo, the head of security, queued up the footage on a large monitor, showing Julian's meticulously forged sketches next to Ilara's dated original design files, displayed from 3 different timelines, text messages, financial statements, the falsified artist statements submitted to the gallery, the email chain that Julian had deleted from Ilara's laptop, but which Arthur's tech team had pulled from a cloud backup. Ms. Sterling examined everything with the practiced eye of a woman who had spent 30 years spotting fakes. When she was done, she looked at Ilara with an expression of profound respect, mixed with something that looked like awe. Mrs. Archer, in my 30 years in this business, I've learned a little something about vision. The people who try to steal your light are always the ones terrified to live in your shadow. You didn't need to raise your voice tonight. You just had to present your work and tell your story that holds more weight than most people can ever create. She rose to her feet. Let us go. Make an introduction. Ms. Sterling strode to the center of the main hall and tapped the microphone on the musician's lectern. The room fell silent in rolling waves, conversations fading from the front to the back until 500 people stood in quiet anticipation. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. Their faces turned toward a woman whose influence was absolute. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, I apologize for this brief interruption. I have a few corrections to the evening's program that require your immediate attention first. The masterpiece sculpture being unveiled tonight was created by Ilara Archer, not, as was fraudulently claimed, by her husband, Julian Archer. Mr. Archer, your attempt to claim your wife's work as your own has been noted. Julian shot up from his spot near the bar so quickly he knocked a tray of glasses over. This is preposterous, he stammered. The gallery owner continued as if he hadn't spoken second. The scathing reviews and professional attacks levied against Mrs. Archer's previous work have been traced back to a coordinated campaign of misinformation led by Ms. Sasha Thorne. She is hereby blacklisted from this gallery and is being referred to a journalist ethics committee for review. Sasha was already inching toward the exit, her survival instincts screaming at her to flee. Two security guards, alerted by Leo, stepped into her path with the calm finality of men who were paid to be immovable objects. Third, Ms. Sterling's voice seemed to deepen, resonating with a new gravity. A legal petition filed by Mr. Julian Archer to seize control of his wife's artistic trust, citing emotional instability, has been denied. The petition was based on fabricated evidence of her incompetence, and its exposure renders the motion baseless. Across the room, Veronica Lowe set her glass down with surgical precision and moved toward the coat check without a single backward glance. She was a woman who knew when a bad investment had bottomed out, and the losses tonight were total. And finally, Ms. Sterling said, and the air in the gallery grew thick, almost solid against your skin. Many of you know that the centerpiece of our new collection was billed as the debut of a major new talent tonight. It is my genuine honor to introduce the true artist, a voice of immense power and integrity, whose work you are about to see for the first time, Mrs. Ilara Archer. Ilara walked through an archway from the adjoining hall. She was still wearing the simple navy dress she'd arrived in. A dress Mia had insisted she buy. Her cheek was still faintly flushed. Her shoulder was sore from the weight of her worries, and around her neck was a simple silver locket, a gift from her grandmother that held her entire world inside. She wasn't flanked by lawyers or supporters. She wasn't dressed in couture. She didn't enter to a swell of music or a dramatic spotlight. She walked into the room just as she had hours before, quietly, simply, without pretense. Because Ilara Archer had never needed pretense to be brilliant, she had only ever needed her truth. The gallery erupted, a tidal wave of whispers and gasps as 500 people recalibrated their entire understanding of the evening. The quiet, pregnant woman in the simple dress the wife Julian had called his muse. The emerging artist Veronica had ignored the naive talent Sasha had savaged. She was the genius they were all there to celebrate. She was the name that would define the next decade of their world, and her art illuminated the very walls around their stunned faces. Julian's face was a mask of disbelief. His mind, so adept at scheming and manipulation, simply shut down. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy pale shade, as if he were watching a ghost that can't be real. He muttered, "She's no one. She's just a hobbyist. She has the talent," Arthur said, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who had waited years for this very moment. The sculpture, valued at $600,000, belongs to her. The artistic trust that funds your entire lifestyle belongs to her. This entire collection, her vision, her work, her name, it all belongs to Mrs. Ilara Archer, and it always did. Veronica's Prosecco flute slipped from her hand and shattered on the polished concrete floor, the sound echoing sharp and final, like a gavel ending a trial. Ilara looked at Julian, the man who had told her she was merely dabbling, the man who had stolen her ideas, undermined her confidence, and tried to claim her soul's work as his own. She looked at him with an emotion that wasn't rage. And it wasn't victory, it was focus, the sharp, clean focus of an artist finally seeing a subject for exactly what it is. "You tried to steal my work in my own studio, Julian," she said, her voice soft but carrying across the silent room. "And the worst part isn't that you thought you could get away with it. The worst part is that you thought my art, my soul, was just another thing for you to possess." She turned to Veronica, who had collapsed onto a leather bench, gripping its edge as if it were a life raft in a storm. "You called my work uninspired, derivative, a woman's hobby, but I have always been this artist. Veronica, the only thing that changed tonight is you found out my work is worth a lot of money, and the fact that a price tag is what it takes for you to recognize value tells me everything I need to know about your judgment." Veronica's mouth opened, but no sound emerged for the first time in her life. The woman whose opinion could make or break a career had absolutely nothing to say. Ilara looked at Sasha, last the critic who had methodically torn her down, who had sat at her dinner table, who had tried to erase her from the art world. To make room for her lover, you wanted the fame you thought he had. Ilara said you stood by him as he tried to silence me because you thought he was the future, the next big thing, but he creates nothing he never has. And now, neither will you from the back of the gallery. A voice boomed with the pure, uncut joy of a friend who could no longer contain it. Yes, girl, Mia yelled, standing on a velvet bench to be seen over the crowd. The absolute nerve of these fakes could power the whole city of Chicago. A few people chuckled, not because it was hilarious, but because the unbearable tension in the room had to escape somehow, and Mia's defiance was the release valve security escorted Julian, Veronica, and Sasha from the gallery. Julian sputtered, trying to argue, trying to claim artistic collaboration, citing conversations he'd misremembered and influence he'd never had. Veronica cried quiet, furious tears that impressed no one. Sasha said nothing. She walked out with her head held high, her career in ashes, knowing that every choice she had made for the past 3 years had led directly to this moment of absolute public and private ruin. The gallery was still after they were gone. 500 people stood in their designer clothes, holding their half-empty glasses, and felt a profound and uncomfortable weight settling in their chests, a feeling that tasted a lot like complicity, because every single one of them had read the cruel reviews and heard the dismissive whispers, and not one of them had bothered to look at the work and judge for themselves. Ilara let them feel it. She did not excuse them. She didn't make a speech about second chances or the spirit of art. She just stood in her gallery, in her simple navy dress, and said the one thing she wanted to say: the unveiling will now begin. All proceeds from tonight's silent auction will go to a grant for underrepresented female artists in memory of my grandmother Eleanor, who taught me that true value is something you create, not something you own. The applause that came next was layered. It was shame and wonder and relief and the deep, abiding respect people feel. When they have witnessed something authentic, they know they will be talking about for the rest of their lives. 6 months later, Ilara stood in a sun-drenched Chicago studio, placing a gentle hand on the bassinet where her daughter slept. The rain had passed an hour ago, and sunlight streamed through the massive industrial windows, making dust motes dance in the air. Her new sculpture, a towering form of steel and reclaimed wood, stood half-finished in the center of the room. The silver locket hung around her neck, catching the light as she began to work, connecting her to a past that had made her, and a future she was building herself. She opened a new encrypted folder. She remembered Liam's voice. "Start building your own battleship." She began methodically documenting everything, every preliminary sketch with a digital timestamp, every email exchange with Marcus about their dream home, every saved note. She laid a hand on her stomach, a silent vow passing between mother and child. They thought she was fragile. They thought she was a victim. They were about to learn that true wealth isn't about what you own, it's about what you're willing to fight for. And she was fighting for more than a design now. She was fighting for her child. With shaking hands, she searched for the jeweler online. Their social media feed was a glittering portfolio of custom pieces. She scrolled back 2 days, and her breath caught in her throat. There it was, draped across a delicate, tanned wrist, the platinum catching the light. The caption read, "A special creation for the incredible Chloe Sterling. May it bring you nothing but success." Chloe Sterling, the relentless, high-powered developer from Liam's biggest project, the woman he had laughingly called his work rival. The nausea that hit her had nothing to do with her pregnancy. That night, she didn't set the table for a cozy dinner. She waited for him in the living room, the city lights twinkling behind her like 1,000 indifferent eyes. She let him recount his fabricated stories about client meetings and boring seminars. When he finally finished, she simply slid the receipt onto the coffee table in front of him. "I found this," she said, her voice level and devoid of emotion. "To a better view. How thoughtful." He stumbled through a series of frantic denials. It was a corporate gift, he insisted, a thank you for a client. When he saw the cold certainty in her gaze, his strategy shifted. He attacked. He called her paranoid, emotional, blaming the crazy hormones of her pregnancy for her accusations. "Honestly, Amelia, you're being completely irrational," he said, his voice laced with false pity, but the lie couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. Their marriage had been the misunderstanding. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shed a single tear. The hurricane of betrayal inside her had focused into a point of chilling calm. She rose from the couch, her pregnancy a silent testament to everything he had broken. "I want you to pack your things, Liam," she stated, the words sharp and final. "I want you out of this apartment tonight." He looked at her, utterly stunned, the master architect watching his own carefully constructed world collapse around him. Once the front door clicked shut, the apartment's silence was deafening, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with a painful, liberating clarity. She was alone, pregnant, and her future had been torn to shreds. But as she rested a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of her unborn son, a powerful realization dawned. Her life was no longer about being a wife. It was about being a mother. And her battle was now for the small person who needed her to be strong. 4 months later, a baby boy with her quiet eyes and Liam's dark curls slept peacefully in his crib. The Chicago skyline they once admired together now served as a simple backdrop to a new, smaller, more meaningful world. When her lawyer called about the divorce proceedings, his voice was just distant noise. There was no anger left, only a profound sense of peace. Her life had been brutally edited, leaving only the essential truth. It was just the two of them now. This story was a carefully constructed narrative, edited by our team to explore complex emotional themes with genuine impact. Every element was designed with purpose, reflecting our belief that stories should do more than just entertain. They should resonate with the truth of human experience,